Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. It's Cynicalex, and today I want to talk to you guys about gear sets. And what I'm referring to more specifically about gear sets is obelisks. I will talk a little bit about ISOs, but this is mainly a video about obelisks, to a much lesser degree ISO sets, and to a much lesser degree gear sets in terms of what you roll on the sets. But what I'm talking about in this whole umbrella term is whether it's for PvP or PvE. So if you're not familiar with those phrases, what it means is PvP means player versus player. Those are game modes like Alliance tournaments, most notably, but also live battle world and I guess timeline. Those are basically the only ones. Co-op is not PvP. Yeah, so basically, and I guess Shadowlands King of the Hill. Fucking AZ Lido up and down this shit. Anyways, so PvP are player versus player modes, and then everything else, you know, special missions, story missions, daily missions, villain siege, alliance battle, Shadowland, all that crap, that's all PvE, or player versus environment. You can say PvM, player versus monster, whatever, you know, it's basically the AI, what the game developers have put in place to be the difficulty. And why it's important to talk about it today is because this ties back to all of the advice questions that I get and that other people get. What obelisk should I put on this character? What ISO set should I get for that character? And yes, guys, I have given you advice in the past about, you know, these specific sets are very good. ISO sets basically come in two flavors: attack sets and healing sets. There are a couple of other notable ones, but for the most part, the other ones suck balls. That's still true, and the advice I gave you guys about gearing up your character and about obelisks is still true. I'm not taking any of that information back or contradicting myself, but what I did realize recently is that there is a big difference, especially for obelisks, in terms of whether it's for PvP or PvE. And I personally made a mistake where I had an obelisk on a character that was more geared towards PvP, and it actually prevented me from doing the things that I wanted to do in PvE content. And so I wanted to bring awareness to you guys today about that, and I wanted to talk about that and give you, I guess, some extended, in-depth advice about it, because it really sucks to have to go back and change something that you worked so hard on, especially when a lot of the penalties for unequipping things is crystals. And of course, for a lot of you guys, crystals don't come easy, so I don't want you to make, you know, the same mistakes that I made. First of all, so you don't make the mistakes, but second of all, in case you can't afford to make those mistakes, because, you know, daddy's got to buy them new shoes and you can't afford the crystals in the future fights with the Waylords. So I'll talk about the personal experience I had first, and then I'll get into the finer details of it. So what happened? Basically, I was competing with a member in my alliance for top score, and I noticed on one of the days, it was Blast Mail, that the person I was competing with was out DPSing me. They were doing way more damage with their Doctor Strange than I was, running basically the same team, and therefore, because they were doing so much more damage, they were getting a much higher score than I was. And I was, you know, I wanted to get that high score. I'm competitive by nature. I wanted to be number one. So I took a look at the only thing that I could change about the character, because the rest of the gear setup is all offensive, you know. I mean, the skill cooldown is just so that I can get through my get to my invulnerability faster, but everything else is just as offensive as I can get. I have a fully ascended offensive set, Power of Angry Hulk, 40% all attack trigger. My cards are very offensive, so the only thing that I could change was the obelisk. So the obelisk you're seeing now on the left is the one that I had, it's the one that I have equipped now. It's a 30% defense penetration with an increased damage of 160% for one time. The increased cold damage is useless, but this was the best, most high DPS offering obelisk that I had, that I could find. I equipped another better one on my Carnage, but otherwise this was the best one I had. And the one you're seeing here on the right, this recovery rate, dodge, invincibility, is the original obelisk that I had for Doctor Strange. So what is the mistake that I made? Well, in simple terms, I built this first obelisk on the right with recovery rate, and this is probably close to the ideal set for PvP content. PvP content requires the invincibility obelisks with the proc, because There are just too many moments where you're going to take too much burst damage, and the invincibility proc prevents that and prevents you from being one-shotted. Well, it doesn't prevent you from being one-shotted, but it prevents you from being like 2 or 3-shotted. And it's basically essential for PvP. If you go back and you look at my Alliance Tournaments video where I broke down the Nick Fury versus Secret Avengers battle, all of the characters on all of the teams all had invincibility proc obelisks. It was insane. And I made the mistake foolishly of putting one on my Doctor Strange, you know, thinking that it was the best option, because, you know, guys, I'm not the best person at this game, and I do get influenced by other people. And so when I was building an obelisk for Doctor Strange, I looked up other people's Doctor Stranges, especially on alliances that I respect and that I think do a really good job in the game, and I found that they all had those types of obelisks. They actually had defense penetration plus recovery plus invincibility. I could not roll that. This is the closest that I got, so I went with it. But my Alliance teammate, who was beating me with his score, his obelisk was much closer to the one I have here on the left. It was defense penetration plus a damage proc for one time. And so in my frustration and also in my realization, I actually unequipped the obelisk for about 600, I believe it's 600 crystals, yep. And then I equipped another one. I didn't want to overwrite it because I didn't want to lose this obelisk on the right. It's still very powerful in certain situations, but I wanted to be better at PvE. And so I basically came to this realization that, well, first of all, my alliance doesn't compete in tournaments, so I don't have that PvP content to look forward to or to worry about, I guess. And then timeline battle, I can ace that anyways. I have Doctor Strange, I have Wasp, I have Thanos. Battle World is pretty much a joke these days, for better or for worse. So I basically have nothing to PvP for. And this is where I started to realize I had the big aha moment, and this is probably the same for a lot of you guys watching my videos. I mean, not all of you guys are drooling mankeys, but some of you guys, you know, are just average players or just like mid-level players who maybe you have Doctor Strange, you have a couple of high-level characters, but you're not, you know, at that stage where you're in high-level alliances. You're not competing for, you know, #1 on timeline like Sealy South is. Oh, he's #3 now. Sorry, Super Choke, some kinky shit. You know, you're not trying to get Shadowlands MVP. You know, you're not trying to get first place on Battle World so you can get 700 bios or 777, whatever the fuck it is. You just want to be able to clear world boss faster. You want to be able to clear Extreme Alliance battle with a higher score. You want to, you know, be able to complete stage 25 of Shadowland. And all of that, guys, points to going for PvE geared sets and PvE oriented obelisks and ISO sets. And so that's kind of that's the lesson and the moral kind of thing that I wanted to impart on you guys with my personal story. It cost me 600 crystals, and it cost me a little bit of my pride, because I guess you know, it was pretty stupid at the time for me to just follow what other high-level players were doing, not realizing that they don't necessarily need to compete for a high-level alliance battle score, because everyone in their alliance is so good that they're consistently in the top 16. What they then need to worry about is a whole different, you know, set of problems with alliance tournaments and trying to win those. And so I had the wrong perspective from which to draw my advice. So I'm kind of trying to relay that to you guys now, that it's better to figure out what you're gearing the character for. Do you want this character specifically for PvP, or is this character only for PvE? Holy fuck, guys. So you have to figure out what the character is for. Thank you for the Dimension Rift, NG. Speak of the devil. You have to figure out what the character is for. Are you gearing this character for PvP, or are you gearing this character just for PvE content? Are you only a PvE player? I think most players in general are gearing towards PvE content, so I just wanted to give you guys some short tips on what you should do to maximize your characters for PvE content, not for player versus player. So in general, guys, although there are certain characters who get skill cooldown triggers on their uniforms, or because of passives or because of skills, in general, it's wise to try and max out your character's skill cooldown through a combination of their gear and your cards and your alliance and your ISO set. The reason for that is consistency. So even though Doctor Strange's 6-star skill gives him a 1-second cooldown on all his skills, It's more important for PvE if you can cast that 6-star skill as reliably as possible to take advantage not so much of the skill cooldown, but of the immunity, because the immunity is what's going to prevent you from dying, and because you're playing manually, you can control kiting, and you can better position yourself to take advantage of that immunity for the full 7 seconds. In a lot of PvP content, it's random, and you're just off the seat of your pants just hoping that the connection is good and whatever. So you want to maximize other things to kind of give yourself a high risk, high reward. But in PvE content, you want to stress consistency, and you want to normalize all of your results. You don't want to have these wild differences day to day, week to week, month to month, because A, it's frustrating if you just suddenly lose, and B, you're not going to get as many rewards in the long run. So you want to maximize consistency, and skill cooldown is one of the best ways to do that. Secondly, you want to maximize, of course, DPS. Now, you have to maximize DPS while balancing the character's survivability, because if you're dead, your DPS is 0. So in that situation, you have to analyze both the ISO set and the obelisk in tandem. But in general, guys, you can probably get more out of a defensive obelisk and an offensive ISO set. It's also a lot easier. There are multiple offensive ISO sets that you can roll, but there's basically only 2 offensive obelisks that you can roll: defense penetration and the increased damage for 1 time. And both of those stats are very difficult to get. They're very rare, and they're very costly, and it actually takes a lot of time as well, because you have to farm obelisks, and there's only 3 places to farm obelisks: special missions, the Dark Dimension missions from the Doctor Strange Epic Quest, and the item shop. That's the only real successful place to farm them. You can get them rarely from other places, but other than that, guys, those are the places you can farm them. So that being said, you're better off going with an offensive ISO set like Hawkeye, Overdrive, Power of Angry Hulk, and then going with a more defensive-minded obelisk with an invincibility proc or a heal proc, all defense, max HP, stuff like that. Of course, max HP, all defense, those are not the ideal obelisks per se, but it's just to give you more of an idea of what you should be aiming for in general. Of course, guys, the best stats on an obelisk are defense penetration and increased damage for 1 times, and then something like recovery rate. But of course, that's not always possible to get, so you have to kind of manage your expectations in that sense. In general, you want to stay away from defensive stats like dodge, because they're inconsistent. Guaranteed dodge is different, but regular dodge is just too inconsistent, and that kind of goes against what we were saying about consistency. So you want to stick to invincibility procs and stuff like that, but then you also want to see based on the character. So in this case, Doctor Strange does not benefit from an invincibility proc ever unless it's in a random PvP mode like Alliance tournaments. Because I can manually control him in Alliance battle and whatever, I can put him in a situation where he's never going to need that invincibility proc. Same with characters like Elsa, tier 2, Black Bolt, tier 2. All those characters, when you're controlling them manually, they become much less susceptible to taking damage unless you're an absolute fucking goof when you play. So in that situation, the invincibility proc on an obelisk becomes almost useless. It's basically never going to happen as long as you play halfway decently. In that situation, of course, things like crit damage, even crit rate, of course, still defense penetration is the top, but all of those offensive stats that you can roll on an obelisk become so much more valuable. And so you have to see when you're doing PvE content, guys, what you're trying to get out of the character, what the character's strengths and weaknesses are, and then of course you have to play into those. You don't want to give a heal set to a character that already heals. You don't want to give an offensive set to a character that needs a heal or that needs a little bit of defense, because then they're going to die too fast. So for example, guys, it's not always good to have a heal set or an attack set. I'll give you one example. There are not many examples, but someone like Green Goblin, tier 1 at least, is a good example. Tier 1, Green Goblin is a glass cannon, so he needs a lot of help in the HP department. You could go with something like max HP, but it's better to go with something kind of similar to what I have on the obelisk, offensive, and then, because it's easy to roll elemental damage, go for something defensive on the ISO set. In this situation, we went with drastic density enhancement. Now, because the heals from something like I Am Also Groot are inconsistent, and a character like Green Goblin needs consistency, you go with something like this. You can control and trigger when it procs, because it happens when you attack, and it's an HP shield. So it gives you a little bit more flexibility. Even if you're at max health, it'll still trigger, it'll still help you. Now, this is not always the case for every single character. Some characters with a really high health pool will need that heal instead, or will benefit a lot more from that percent heal rather than the bubble. Someone like, for example, Kingpin. But it's just things like this that you need to take into consideration, but especially take into consideration what you're gearing the character for and what you expect them to be able to do. And so I just wanted to make this video to kind of like a PSA, but not really, kind of like I fucked up and this is my story. So I hope that you guys can take something out of it, and I hope that you guys maybe are prevented from making a dumb decision and having to pay for it in crystals or blood or sex or however you guys pay for things these days. And of course, guys, if you like what you see, I hope to see you again tomorrow. Take care.